All right, RC390 in black and white because the color printer is not working right now. Growing pains, my friends. Growing pains, new business, and we still got a lot of things to work out, but it's all good. So, 710 plus miles in a week on the KTM RC390. Here are my raw thoughts. I'm going to do a full review, obviously, but these are my initial thoughts on the product. So, overall, to the answer to the question, is it overhyped? I don't think so. I think it is definitely warrants a lot of the hype you hear. It is an awesome bike. It is outstanding. It is very nimble, lightweight, and it looks great. It's got a good amount of grunt from that engine that it has, and it's also like the Ninja 250, great bike as well. Obviously 2005, a little bit dated. Ninja 300, much needed improvement, but I would say the extra grunt, the horsepower and torque that you get with the RC390 puts it in a situation where, unlike the 250, I believe the 390 is very highway capable. It's not highway aggressive, it's highway capable. I guess you could say the same thing about the Ninja 250, but the thing about the Ninja 250 is it's barely highway capable. It definitely is a bike that I feel you can ride on a highway, but it's not ideal. With the KTM RC390, I think we've got more than enough power. For motorcycle standards, it's definitely anemic on the highway, but in terms of a highway vehicle, so I'm comparing it to cars. I mean, it is a motorcycle, but it's a lower powered motorcycle. And I think it's important when you're considering, like, is it fast enough for the highway? It's got the power that you would have from a normal vehicle, not a performance vehicle, but from a normal car. So if it's as fast as a normal car, then it's, for the most point, as appropriate for the highway as a normal car. Now, it can certainly be almost aggressive, and in some points aggressive in the city. Now, the aggressive will be the initial get up and go, first gear, and things like that. When you're riding the torque, or when you're riding peak power, it definitely moves around. In general, it moves around with authority in the city. It's definitely not a slouch in the city at all whatsoever. You can own the road on the RC390. You know, the flickable, lightweight, and that torquey engine. You are good to go. So that's the good. Now let's talk about the bad. I haven't officially voted on how I feel about KTM. I don't really get a good vibe from them, and I don't particularly think I want to have more KTM products in the future. I will go into why I feel about that in the future, but they just don't give me a very good vibe. And a lot of that's based on my experience from Americade, where I had a great experience with Honda, absolutely. Yamaha, absolutely. I also had a good experience with the guys at Tuono, Aprilia, and BMW. BMW is cool, but I don't know. They leave me scratching my head a little bit in terms of just the vibe I was getting. But absolutely, KTM just didn't leave a good feeling at all. So I don't know if I like the company. And as far as the actual product itself, I did notice shifting issues that came up within the first 400 miles. A lot of times third gear, you can't get down to second. You could press it and press it and press it and press it hard, and it's like it's stuck. Will not go down to second gear. I've also noticed it slipping out of gear as well a couple times on hard acceleration. Now, I did some research, and apparently they have an issue with, it's a known issue. Well, I love when there's known issues and you ask the company, they're like, oh, I've never heard about that. But anyway, we'll talk about that in another video. But apparently there's a known issue with the gear adjuster being loose out of the factory. And what do you know? I read about this, and I took a look at my bike, and it was loose. So apparently it's an easy fix, so I'm gonna go and do that adjustment. I think part of the problem also is the way that it is adjusted. So not just the looseness of it, but also the way it's set up out of factory. I think, and this is probably why I can't get into second gear sometimes, is at its lowest position, I think there is a contact that's happening, so it's hitting something. So that would make sense that sometimes when you're shifting, you can't push it down enough to get it, to go to the lower gear, because you're hitting something which is restricting the motion. So I'm gonna make that adjustment. I'll let you guys know. But just the fact that this is a known issue, and apparently several people have had this issue, so it makes me wonder about quality control, because something like that to me should be addressed to the point where, okay, so we see this is happening, so we're going to make an adjustment to our manufacturing process so that this issue stops happening. Now, that being said, I am not working at a KTM dealership, so I don't know. Maybe they have adjusted it. Maybe the current RC390s don't have this issue anymore because they've made adjustments. So I don't know. All I know is this is a known issue. I got a bike, and what do you know? It happens to me as well. Another thing I noticed within 400 miles, 500 miles, the front plastic that's right up here, that's right behind the handlebars. It's like a little kind of triangular shape on facing the sky, so it's facing upward. It's right in the center between the fuel, where you put the fuel in, and where the handlebars are. That piece I noticed was loose. I got off the bike, and all of a sudden I saw this huge gap where that plastic meets the tank, and I was like, what's this about? I've never seen this before. And then sure enough, I pushed it back and sort of snapped it into place. So again, quality control leaves me, sort of questioning things. Great bike, fun bike, awesome bike, but two quality control issues. This is a brand new bike, right? 700 miles on this bike, and those 700 miles were put in a week. So that's significant. 700 miles after weeks and weeks of riding, months and months of riding, like a lot of riders do, that's different. But 700 miles in a week, and already you've got a piece of plastic coming loose, and also the shifting issue. So those are the main complaints about the bike. Now, in terms of riding it and commuting and stuff like that, comfort levels. So, I had no issues. I went from Lake George to New York City, a round trip, obviously, not on the same day, but within a week I did the going up there and coming back down. It was not torturous at all. In fact, after a long week of riding and shooting, I did the journey home. I actually added an hour to my journey coming home. So what is that to say? It's not the most comfortable bike in the world, but it is comfortable enough that with the right techniques, you can actually do some decent mileage on the bike. Now, obviously, no one's going to buy this bike to do a lot of mileage, but I think it's important to know that, hey, if I could do a 4-hour trip on this bike, then in terms of you riding it normally for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or an hour, I think you should not have any issues. So keep that in mind. But again, certain techniques I was using. I'll do a specific video talking about my techniques so you guys can understand how I did that. But the final thing that I would say as a commuter, if you're going to use it as a commuter bike, it's not an ideal commuter bike. The Ninja 250 definitely much better. I'm sure the Ninja 300 and 400 probably much better. The handlebars are a little bit aggressive on this. So what I found with commuting is it's one thing when you go on a long distance trip and you can settle into certain techniques and the way that you're riding the bike to sort of mitigate any comfort issues. But when you're stop and go, stop and go, stop and go, stoplight, stop signs and things like that. So the typical things you do in a normal commute. I mean, if your commute strictly highway, then you're hardly any city riding, then you're good to go. But if you're going to be in bumper to bumper, you got stop signs and stop lights and a lot of stuff going on. What I've found is that the handlebars, the way that they're angled, which is like a sports bike, it's not torturous, but I feel that I need to pay attention when I'm riding it in terms of trying not to put too much weight on my wrists. So that's the main issue that I feel when I'm commuting on it is I feel like, hey, I gotta, keep the weight off my wrist, keep the weight off. I don't feel like the R607, I think it was, definitely, I think more aggressive and more of an issue than this is. But I would see if people are gonna use this as a commuter bike, they might be complaining about issues with their wrist. Your mileage may vary. It's based on your physical condition and how your body is and your size and things like that. But for me, the wrists were something that it wasn't hurting me, but it was something that I felt I got to pay attention to. So keep your weight off your wrist, keep your weight off your wrist. Like I got to keep thinking that, because the thing is when you're in the highway, you can settle in. When you're braking all the time, you slide forward, and then you got to remember you got to slide back. When you're stopping, you brace against the stop, and then you're changing the position of your torso. When you're in a highway, you can just say, hey, I need to get my weight off my wrist, so I'll straighten out my back and I'll sit in a nice position and I can settle in that way. But when you're stopping and going, you break that and you keep noticing, oh shoot, I have weight on my wrist again. Oh, I have weight on my wrist again. So you have to keep reminding yourself. Well, for me anyway, I keep reminding myself, hey, get your weight off the wrist, weight off the wrist, weight off the wrist. Now doing that makes it work, but a bike that has a more comfortable ergonomic, I don't have to think about that. I could just ride to work, have a great ride, and I'm good to go. On this bike, I have to actually pay attention to my riding position and ergonomics, because if I don't, potentially, I've never had this issue, but potentially I could end up with like wrist pain or something like that. So that's the main thing. The brakes are sufficient, but they are definitely on the weak side, especially when I started getting into aggressive braking, braking from high speeds and things like that. I think the anti-lock also takes away from the power of that. I turned off the anti-lock and it's much more powerful. But of course now you have to modulate the brakes and make sure you don't lock it up and things like that. I did start to endo a couple times at lower speeds with the anti-lock off. So I'll need some more time to play around with it and see, and I'll let you guys know. But the brakes are adequate, but definitely on the weaker side. If you're going to turn it into a track bike, I would definitely think about upgrading the brakes, because I wouldn't want to be going, super fast and then having to brake at the last minute on a bike like this, because those brakes are really not powerful at all. That being said, as far as getting your knee down, I got my knee down for the first time on this bike yesterday. I don't know, it felt a little awkward, and I think it maybe because of the rear sets are too low. I'm not sure. Something about it doesn't feel quite right when I'm trying to get my knee down and really getting to maximum lean angle. I don't know what it is about it, but I feel like I may, if I were going to make it a track bike, I may want to do some kind of adjustment to the bike, probably having to do the rear sets. Other than that, it's a little noisy, interestingly enough, even with the stock exhaust. I find that I appreciate my earplugs for sure. It's not a noisy like this bike is so loud, but it's definitely the volume is definitely up there a little bit, so that's something else to consider. I think Ninja 250, Ninja 300 might actually be a quieter bike. That's my feeling. I need to confirm that, but that's the way I feel about it. Other than that, I like the suspension. It's not flopping around like a Ninja 250. It's much more firm, much more conducive to sharp turns and things like that. The mirrors tend to vibrate at maybe city speeds when you're at higher RPM. So that's not good. Not a major problem. It's not something I think about a lot. Like every time I'm riding, I can't see anything, but it's definitely a thing. The gas tank is not metallic, so you won't be able to put your metallic tank bags on it. So that's something else to consider as well. I think that's about it. If I think about anything else, I will comment below. If you guys have any questions, please let me know below as well. Guys, I'm